Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with one of our donation decks of the week, and this is Urza, Lord High Artificer. Before we get into that, I think it's worth pointing out that we've hit 900 subscribers, which is very, very exciting, and we're about to hit 1,000 soon, I hope. I feel like we're almost there, and when I started this channel, I always felt like 1,000 subscribers was the main goal, and I think we're so close to it, and I'm so excited, so hopefully we can get there soon. I can make a nice celebratory video then and there. But until then, if you have subscribed, thank you so much for your support, and if you haven't subscribed, maybe you could. That'd be very nice. This deck, Urza Lord High Artificer, comes to us from Felipe, or Philippe. I'm not too sure, I hope I pronounced that correctly. They say that this deck has a lot of token creatures, big board, but no punch and no main win con. And they say they don't play CDH, they play at a higher casual level. Absolutely, let's take a look. I have a lot to say about this deck, and I have a lot of suggestions for both punch and a little more resilience for the deck itself. But before we get to that, let's go take a look at the commander and get going. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Urza Lord High Artificer, and why are they our mono blue artifact commander? Now, Urza came out in Modern Horizons 1, if I remember correctly, and this was a card that we were all very, very frightened of. And though he turned out to be less strong than expected in Modern, I'm pretty sure in Commander, CEDH and otherwise, he continues to be quite a threat. Urza is a 4-mana human artificer in mono blue, 1/4, and 3, not 2, but 3 very relevant abilities. The first one is that when he enters the battlefield, you create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token that has power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts you control. Colloquially known as Karnstructs, because they originally came, this typage or this type of artifact creature came from Karn. Nowadays, I think of them more as Saga tokens off of Urza Saga, but still very, very beefy creatures. Then our second ability, almost just as strong, to tap untapped artifacts you control to add blue mana. This makes every single one of your artifacts, whether summoning sick or otherwise, tap for blue, which is immensely powerful in a mono blue deck. And you might say, well, what are you going to cast or use all that blue mana on? Well, Urza is still here for you with a third ability that says 5 mana, shuffle your library, exile the top card, and until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Obviously, if you hit a land, you don't get anything. You can still play the land, but you cannot cast it and get really good benefits, but if you hit a non-land, it could be rather good. Now, this last ability is somewhat worth considering when we look at the deck in terms of what we have that we can cast and use right away. Looking at the deck list itself, I am generally a fan of it. Why do I say generally? Well, it feels like it's one of those days where my viewers are here to make me scream, and we have 28 lands. 28 is too few. I recognize very much so that Urza is very much so, I said that twice, able to make up for that lack of mana by producing his own mana. We're playing a lot of 0 mana artifacts that can be turned into mana rocks. We're playing mana rocks themselves. If you get a turn 2 arcane signet, you just need a third land, play Urza, and all your artifacts now tap for a blue. And I think that's nice, but I mean, you're still gonna get mana screwed really bad. I feel like this is the kind of deck that if you're playing with strangers and you play with them, those same strangers only once, and then you switch to another deck, yeah, no one's gonna see this coming. But after a few games of you being mana screwed or not getting a lot of lands, your opponents are gonna know to basically just bully Urza out of the game. Counter him when he's trying to come down, do removal when you're tapped out, and all of a sudden you're going to really suffer from an inability to make mana. Now, I think that's fine. It is somewhat problematic because Urza himself is in a deck that, like most Urza decks, are very dependent on Urza himself. so it's really hard to get away from already being pressured out of the game, and this making us very, very much so dependent on our commander makes it a little worse, I would say. Though I didn't put it in my additions, I think you could find that land that puts your commander directly into your hand. I think it's Command Beacon. That would go a long way towards ensuring that Urza can't be hated out of the game. But I would also just suggest, hey, why can't we just go to 35 lands at least? Which is insane to say that's 7 additional lands, but it is 7 additional lands. Look at our sideboard even, we've got Castle Vantress and Emergence Zone right there, and already I'm just like, yeah, play them. They're lands. Goodness, please play them. I recognize we have cards like Mishra's Bauble, we have cards like Urza's Bauble, and we're playing any, like, even Aether Spellbomb, but if you've watched this before, you know, I don't think that cantrips have the same kind of power they do in 100-card decks singleton as they do in 60-card decks with multiple copies. So Mishra's Bauble is fantastic in other formats where it is a very good cantrip, but here it's just okay. I would honestly rather this just be a cantrip in general, and I would rather it be, you know, even something like, I don't know, I'm going to say Preordain if we're not playing that, which we're not, because at least it digs you further. Speaking of cantrips, before we look at our curve and move on, something even worth mentioning here is Brainstorm. So Brainstorm in a deck that does not have meaningful ways to shuffle, and no, I do not consider a 5-mana text on our commander a shuffle ability, is a trap for sure. Especially when you are mana screwed. If you have ever played this kind of, or you've ever been in this situation, or you've watched someone being in this situation where they're mana screwed and they use Brainstorm and they don't have a shuffle effect and they draw 3 non-lands and they have to put 2 other non-lands onto the top of their deck, guaranteeing that despite the Brainstorm, they're still 3 turns away from a land, 3 turns away from maybe getting a land. Nightmare. Absolute nightmare. And for that reason, we need lands, we need shuffle effects if we're going to play Brainstorm. This is a huge concern of mine. But let's move on to other aspects of the deck. The curve itself, I think, is rather nice. We're very much so on 2 being the highest one, which I don't mind. 4 is a bit higher than I would like, and perhaps we'll talk about a few of the targets there. And generally, though, I think it's really nice. We trail off, we have a nice amount of 0 drops in an artifact deck, we have a nice amount of 1 drops. Generally, I'm a big fan of the curve, and I think it is a step in the right direction. Speaking of that curve, I think a lot of the cards I kind of want to pick on are cards that I believe are a little greedy for the rest of the shape of the deck. What is that shape of the deck? Well, I should say that the shape of the deck is an artifact, what we would call a critical mass deck. So a critical mass deck is a deck that needs to get to a certain number of resources in order to go off. So these are generally token decks, a lot of engine decks, treasure decks, which I guess in a way are token decks, big mana decks. They are decks that aim to amass one resource. And the resource in this deck is artifacts, but specifically the constructs. As the deck builder mentioned, this is a token-based artifact deck, and so until we have enough of those tokens, we really can't do much, right? We're just kind of moving forward, playing some engine pieces, playing some smaller plays, and then we're hoping at a certain point that we can push all of those constructs or saga tokens into a win. Which I will say, also for what it's worth, Urza's Saga is not in here, but it is an expensive piece to throw in. So looking at that in mind, cards that kind of don't fit in as nicely with that theme are the cards that I'm a little suspicious of. And the theme, and to be specific, it's not what they do, it's at the cost they're at the land count we have. So Illusionist Stratagem is an example, it's kind of the poster child here. We could also be looking at, let's go back to those 4 drops. We could also be looking at things like the Golden Argosy. We can look at, to an extent, Vidalcan Orrery, Voidwalk even. These are cards that I feel cost a little too much for what they do, and therefore are holding the deck back from making efficient plays. Illusionist Stratagem is just a kind of, it's 1 mana more than Ghostly Flicker and Displace, which are the premium versions of this ability, just so you can draw a card. And though it's not always a bad thing, adding the text draw a card to a card for 1 extra mana, when we're so low to the ground and our turns are so specific to the mana we have and the value we're getting out of blinks, that 1 mana will make a difference. And I think I would just rather more efficient blinks, which we already have, than play these kind of cards. So looking at, once again, the higher mana cards, even Melanor, Swift Savior, feels a little win more. I want, and this is going to be my thesis statement of this deck, I want cards that do things rather than cards that help you do things. Does that make sense? Melanor is a very, very strong, assistant piece to what your deck does, blinking your commander. However, the cost of Melandor's ability is a bit high, it's very telegraphed, and it takes an entire turn for it to activate. Whereas on the other hand, we compare it to Thassa. Thassa comes in not as a creature, has indestructibility, and on your end step triggers to get your an extra copy of your commander or blink something else. Like the power scaling between these two creatures is insane. Like the power differential or difference or whatever. Fancy words for saying one is good and the other one is not so good. And that doesn't matter as much, but it does here. We're low to the ground, we can't make mistakes. Casting Melandor and just getting it bolted and waiting a turn cycle to try again with something else is not ideal if we're trying to make splashes, we're trying to make waves. We are blue. Looking around at anything else that really catches my eye, because already we do have a lot of cuts we need to make for lands. Sai feels just a little win more. I recognize that it creates artifact tokens, and I do like that, but the fact that he is a creature requires those artifact spells to be cast. The mana sink is not going to be used in comparison to the mana sink that we could be using off our commander, especially because those artifacts could be tapped for mana. I will say it is neat that you tap those 2 artifacts to pay this cost, sacrifice them to draw a card, but something has to be going wrong for you to be doing this, right? There has to be a board clear or Vandal Blast being overloaded or something. Otherwise, why are you burning through your resources to do this? Likewise, I think Padim also comes off as a little win more, because traditionally the thing you need to protect is your commander, not your artifacts, because though your artifacts do some cool things, and there's definitely some that stand out as being very, very strong or very repeatable effects, it is your commander that you are dependent on, and I would rather be giving him hexproof than the utility pieces. Once again, we need less cards that help the deck work, and we need more cards that make the deck work. Looking at the rest, I think I'm generally a fan. Steel Overseer also kind of stands out to me as a card that I'm not the biggest fan of. This card makes a lot of sense in low to the ground, going wide creature like artifact decks. I'm thinking Mirror especially, but here we don't have that problem. We do go wide, but not at the same rate that mass tokens usually does or mirror decks do. Instead, we're getting 4 to 6 saga constructs, and then they themselves are so big generally that the +1/+1 counter that the Steel Overseer gives is rather meaningless. You are if you're playing a card a turn, Steel Overseer is doing that but worse, because Steel Overseer, I guess it will be counted towards the sagas on those first turn, but Steel Overseer generally has to wait a turn cycle for it. Now, there are some niche kind of things here. If you play Dress Down, if someone plays Dress Down, Steel Overseer will protect those constructs, but that's a corner case for sure. I would much rather just have something else in this case, especially something that doesn't melt to removal or just board wipes as well. We have a lot of counter magic. I think that's fine. I generally like them, especially Offer feels a bit strong before we have, for example, Arcane Denial. But I don't know your meta. You said it's kind of high power level, so Offer can be really good there. I might still be thinking maybe of Swan Song before Offer, but still a very, very strong card. I guess you can use this on your own spells. Maybe I didn't think of that. Turn 1, you cast Mishra's Bauble with an island out. Then you offer, you can't refuse your own Mishra's Bauble to go up 2 mana, so the next turn you play Urza. That's super suspect, but I guess it is an option. Dramatic Reversal obviously is very, very good. Do we have there's Scepter to attach it to make our infinite combo, so that's really nice. Yeah, I think that's generally the things I'm going to say. I think there are some generic things you could be putting in here, like Mystic Remora, but I didn't put those on my list too much. All right, let's move on to additions. So the first piece that I think really catches my eye here is Peregrine Drake. This is a win condition and also a massive value play in this deck all at once. So for those who don't know, this card, with any form of repeatable blink effect that is 4 mana or less, will generate infinite mana. Traditionally, the one we use, and what I use in my Atraxa Blink deck, is Deadeye Navigator. Deadeye Navigator blinks the Drake, and for 2 mana, you gain 3 mana, right? You make 5 mana. So every time you blink, you're going up 3 mana, which adds up to infinite mana instantly, unless your opponents can interact. Now, the way I win with Atraxa in that situation is that I can play Atraxa infinite times and then blink Atraxa with Deadeye Navigator to draw my entire deck. Whereas here, we have a similar situation where we can blink Urza infinite times, and then we can cast every spell from our deck by infinitely activating Urza's Lord Artificer. Whoa, Urza's ability, my goodness. Here's the thing though. How do we win there? We do win, and I want to be clear about that, but it might be a little trickier than one expects. We basically have to draw into a situation where we can make infinite Urzas, then we can blink all of our opponent's cards out of their off of their battlefield. And do we have a haste enabler? I don't think we do need the haste enabler. It couldn't hurt, but we just need one thing to pressure our opponents, and I'm wondering if maybe we don't have that. That might be a bit of a problem. So I do have suggestions to make us win from that situation. But yeah, in the end, it looks like what we'll do is we'll blink all non-land cards from our opponents without haste. So perhaps, yeah. Okay, I still have my suggestions, but at this moment, this will give you infinite advantage. With some additions, it'll let you win the game. Another win condition that I think is very strong here is Kappa Cannoneer. Now, this is a card that was made for Commander and took Legacy by storm, and now is about to be introduced into Modern. And with that in mind, I should be very specific that you should not get this card until 2 months after Modern Horizon 3, unless, you know, you just want to spend $4 on it, which is not that bad. But it will be very low in price. People are going to open tons of this card. The price is going to drop, even if it becomes a staple. This card is just really, really strong in artifact decks. It allows you to go tall incredibly quickly, and it is an unblockable threat that can start, you know, really chipping into your opponents very, very quickly. The Ward 4 is nothing to mess with. It does lose, unfortunately, to board clears like everything else does, but some phasing or some smart blinking can fix that situation for sure. Going past win conditions into more general value, I wanted to talk about Trinket Mage, and I wanted to talk about Tribute Mage. Now, there's going to be a few other blink targets coming up, but these two to me are specifically what I want in this deck. Let's go back to the whole thesis. We don't want cards that make the deck perform better. We want cards that make the deck perform. I think I used Go last time, but it doesn't matter. Trinket Mage and Tribute Mage are very powerful here because they work so well with all of your blinking, and they make your deck work by picking out the cards you want to move forward. You want mana, use Trinket Mage, you get Soul Ring. You want nearly anything, almost every other artifact in your deck is 2 mana. 2 mana or less, and then 1 mana or less. You grab any Arcane Signet, Helm of Awakening, Howling Mine, Imposter Mech. You have so many good choices. That's not even including creatures that you might have. Use it to grab Reality Chip and start drawing cards, right? Both of these are really, really strong. I would note that Trinket Mage might seem a little stronger with more hits, but I absolutely like both of these, and I would play both of them. They're just going to give you a lot of consistency. They're the kind of tutors that players don't seem to be too mad about, even though they're absolutely tutors. And I think they're going to allow your deck to have that punch by grabbing the cards you need and ensuring a lot more consistency. Something with artifacts and blinking is a card I really, really like. I know I shouldn't be adding 4 mana cards, but Whirler Rogue is just a very, very strong card. I like to, here's how it is. I like to compare Whirler Rogue to our homie Sai, right? Sai is 1 less mana, which I think is very, very relevant, but Whirler Rogue also creates tokens, right? It also creates artifact tokens. Now, the things Whirler Rogue does for this deck are just immense. Not only do they make cards unblockable, which is very, very relevant with our Saga constructs, our Saga tokens, our Urza's tokens. Not only them being unblockable is very relevant for punching through, the fact that this creature works with all of our blinking and creates 2 and not 1 token every time is just very, very good. Think about it in the sense, just like a straight comparison, that if you cast a artifact spell, you get 1, and if you cast a blink spell and blink this, you get 2 artifact tokens. So Sai is making half as many, and Whirler Rogue is making twice as much. And not just like, it's really easy to say 2 is better than 1, but the way that works with Urza, by generating 2 more basically Mox Sapphires, right? By creating 2 more mana you can immediately tap, it gives you another thing to do. That could be another blink, it could be another spell, it could be holding up counter magic. It's very, very relevant to this deck and the power level of the deck, and I don't think you're going to be pretty sad with it. Not only, like, one of the things I really like about this is, once again, just like Urza, this is an immediate effect that isn't affected by summoning sickness. Neither does it matter if she has summoning sickness. You immediately play her and you have an unblockable creature. And finally, notably, this does make your opponent's creatures unblockable, which is very good for politics on a few turns, especially when you need to buy some time because you are a deck that needs to amass that critical mass, right? Another blink creature that I think is very, very strong here, maybe a little boring for some, but always a delightful blink creature, is Mulldrifter. Mulldrifter is fantastic because the floor on it is Divination, and Divination is not a bad card. I like Read the Bones, and this is just a weaker Read the Bones sometimes. Because other times, if you have mana up, you can play this for 5 mana, and get a 2/2 flyer in addition to drawing 2 cards. But much more importantly, if you have blinking mana, you can play this for 3, blink the Mulldrifter, and draw 2 additional cards, so up to 4 cards, and keep the Mulldrifter. And that can be blinked again or just attack. Fantastic card. This is just a nice card advantage engine to give you something to do with excess mana, but also allow you to recover from board wipes or pressure on your commander. One more thing, talking about artifacts and tokens and what we can do before we go into a different artifact sub-theme. Junk Winder is really interesting to me here. Now, there is something to say in the current build. If our main supply of tokens is Urza, Junk Winder doesn't look that good. But if we diversify, which is what I'm going to suggest, Junk Winder gets better and better. Not only does Junk Winder come out for cheaper and cheaper the more tokens you have, the other thing is it lets your token drops become freezes, right? Where you tap down our opponent's permanents, mainly creatures, and they are tapped down for an additional turn cycle, which is really, really good. And that directly allows our constructs to get good attacks in. And I really, really like that. This also, once again, is very good as a political play. You can tap down the most aggressive player to take some pressure off of yourself and your opponents. You can tap down another opponent to create an opening for the aggressive player. These kind of moves can be very, very good and take a lot of pressure off of you. And as a card that just is around and benefits from you doing what you want to do, really, really nice. So speaking of alternative kind of side strategies or themes I want to look into, Investigate is something that really catches my eye. Clue tokens are very cheap to make, and they tend to come in multiples, or they tend to come out a lot. And what I like about them is that with Urza, not only do they tap for mana, but they are much harder to deal with than your creatures, right? If you make 20 constructs and your opponents have no blockers, your opponent wipes the board, you're sad because you lost a huge amount of value. But if you have 20 clues and 1 construct or 2 constructs, you're representing still seemingly like reasonable amounts of power. Don't get me wrong, I know the first one has so much more power, but if you lose the board for a board wipe, you get to rebuild that power incredibly quickly, right? There are situations, maybe the example I gave was a little too polarizing, but generally, like, outside of being able to take out all your opponents at once, having 10 10-10s is really good, but like at a certain point a liability, if that makes sense. Unless you are about to win, your 10 10-10s become like, you have to figure out your blocks, they become like everyone's gonna go after you, everyone's gonna focus fire on you. But having like 2 10-10s, or let's be more reasonable, like 2 15-15s, because you have tons of clues, but they are just 2 creatures, that's easier to handle. Your opponents might use removal on them, but you're not worried about a board clear and you still have all of those clues. Maybe this example isn't the best. I'm thinking about the times I would rather have 10 10-10s, but the idea is there. Diversify your threats, have cards that are artifacts that are easier to keep on board than your creatures, and your constructs will benefit from it. Forensic Gadgeteer is the first one. Works kind of like Psi, and I almost would like this to replace Psi, where every time you cast an artifact spell, you get an artifact, but generally, clue tokens are better than Thopters because they become card draw. Also, her second ability is incredibly powerful at making 1 mana to crack a clue. Fantastic. Another one I really, really like, and I especially like here, is Ethereal Investigator. I think not only this is an ETB, so it works really well with our Blink strategy, but also creates 3 tokens per ETB, which is very, very impressive. Whenever that second ability that creates spirit tokens for as you draw second cards, I think in this kind of deck is kind of flavor text. Obviously, it works really well with the clue tokens you are generating, but you are really just looking at this first half of the card. And if you can blink this even once, create 6 artifact tokens for 4 mana and plus a blink, I think that's really, really impressive. Going into finishers, there were 2 other finishers I wanted to think about that specifically work with clues. The first one is Tangle Trove Kelp. I don't know to what degree I love this card, but I really do find it interesting. 7 mana is a lot, but it does immediately make all of your clues into 6/6 creatures, which is pretty good. They don't keep that type. They stop being creatures at the end of the turn, so they will continue to dodge board wipes, and I do really like that. I still think this creature is a lot of mana. Perhaps you can cheat it into play or find other ways of doing it. I would like it a little more. I do think it's really cute that it is also a clue in addition to being a creature, or an artifact creature, I should say. So at worst case scenario, if someone goes Swords to Plowshares, pays the ward 2, at least you can sacrifice it to draw a card and perhaps put it back in your graveyard to pull it out later. I wish it had a better ETB, but for what it's worth, if you're going in the clue direction, this is rather good. The other one that's a little more straightforward to play is Rise and Shine. It's only 6 mana for this ability. It does permanently make your artifact creatures, your non-creature artifacts into creatures, but it is still very, very strong for an immediate punch onto 1 or 2 opponents. If you have enough clues, if you have enough regular artifacts, this can be a very, very hefty card. I think the turn you cast it, it's the strongest because the highest chance of your opponents not seeing it coming. So I think this is a rather good finisher that you could use. I think this is my last card. I could be wrong, but I did want to note Emery. I don't see a lot of recursion in the deck, and I think Emery is particularly strong. As your first piece of recursion that comes out very cheaply, often because of the number of artifacts that you have, and its ability to just, get 1 artifact back, even if it's Mishra's Bauble, right? Being able to pull back Mishra's Bauble just every turn cycle to draw an extra card is pretty good. And that's not counting if it's something like Solemn Simulacrum or something just better, right? Or buying back Isochron Scepter or Conjurer's Closet. This is a very strong card that has a pretty low opportunity cost to play. The stakes are pretty low. Note that you have to cast it. You can't get your Darksteel Citadels back, but it is still worth noting. And that is my thoughts for the deck. Thank you so much, Felipe, for sending me your deck. I will say, once again, my biggest concern here is the lands. Please play just a few more lands. I completely understand that the deck can function at this point, but I think it'll do a lot better, you know, once we have that more reasonable land count, and then we can start seeing what else we can do. I would also suggest, if you're looking for more punch even after this, the next step would probably be to look at more infinite combos. You're already running one, I'm suggesting another one at least. It could make you very, very strong, but you will rapidly find yourself approaching CEDH, because the next upgrades after that are going to be even stronger tutors and even stronger fast mana. If that's not what you're interested in, you can keep this at high power, but it is worth noting. There's still a lot you can do with the deck, and if you do improve the deck, I'd love to see another draft of it, because I really do like Urza. I think they're a lot of fun. Alright, thank you so much for sending the deck my way. Thank you for supporting the channel. Good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.